R. Kelly's criminal trial started earlier this week, and yesterday, the prosecution's main witness took the stand. And so we're going to break down some of the details of her testimony. My name is Jamahl Kersey. I am the principal attorney at Kersey Law, a boutique criminal defense firm. And in this video, we're talking about the prosecution's main witness's testimony that started yesterday. As you probably know, at this point, the prosecution's case against R. Kelly has to do with three main things. The first one is persuading a minor to engage in sexual activity. So they allege that R. Kelly was, in his late 20s going into his early 30s when he was having sex with the main witness in this case, and then around four other young women who were minors at the time as well. He's also being charged with persuading a minor to engage in sexual activity for the purpose of creating a recording or creating a depiction of that activity. And so that's basically the child pornography counts. And then he's being charged with conspiring with his other associates. So he had his former business manager and another individual who aided in what prosecutors call the Kelly business. And so basically the conspiracy charge has to do with them working together to cover up R. Kelly's misdeeds in terms of the actual sexual activity and these tapes. And so Jane is the name that they've put on this main witness. So they haven't revealed her name. They aren't allowing cameras into the courtroom. So oftentimes in these federal cases, you'll see that they do the sketch drawings. But in this case, they don't even have the complete sketch drawing of her face. It's just kind of you see hair and then it's just blank. There are no facial features because they're really taking steps to cover up her identity. I'm sure she's been through enough. And so, there's a lot of people out there who don't want to see this case go forward. A lot of people who believe R. Kelly is innocent of this. And so I'm sure to, protect her security and safety, they're not revealing her identity, or there could be other reasons, but that's what I would imagine that's geared towards. And so Jane gave testimony regarding how she ultimately met R. Kelly and then their sexual relationship. She mentioned that R. Kelly started abusing her when she was only 14 years old. And so the interesting thing is that up until this point, she had completely denied any details about any sexual relationship between her and R. Kelly and denied that it was her in the videos. So these infamous sex tapes that we've been hearing about. So Jane is said to be the subject, so the female subject in these videos. But up until now, she's denied that it was ever her in these videos. And so back then, again, both her and her family denied that it was her in these videos. And so the prosecutor's allegations, and this is going to the obstruction charge, they say that both Jane and her family were paid off to ultimately lie on the record, to lie to police, to lie, in testimony. And so the allegations are basically that there were hundreds of thousands of dollars, a combination of money and gifts that were basically paid to people to convince them not to testify, and also claim that they never, recognized Jane in these videos. So being shown these videos, and then ultimately if they were asked, hey, do you recognize the person in this video? Then they would just say no. And so obviously if you don't have a corroboration in terms of pointing to who this person is, if authorities weren't able to establish that, then that makes their case difficult, if not impossible, to ultimately prove. The prosecutor's other allegations on this topic are that not only were there payments made and gifts given, but there are also, threats. So threats made by both R. Kelly himself and the members of his team. Keep in mind, in this situation is we're talking about R. Kelly, right? And at the height of R. Kelly's fame, he could do no wrong. He was powerful. He was rich. He was famous. He had all the resources to make anybody, against him, to make their lives miserable. It's not like he was going, head to head with other rich, famous, and powerful people. These were just everyday people with everyday jobs, not necessarily people in positions of power. So the allegations are that he was basically able to muscle people into doing what he wanted them to do. And again, this is where the obstruction charges come from. This is the very first time that the woman known as Jane has publicly admitted on the record that the girl in the videotape having sex with R. Kelly is her. And that, this tape that we're talking about is the same tape that was the subject of the 2008 case. So R. Kelly had been prosecuted in Cook County, so in Chicago, and so he was ultimately acquitted. And what the charges have to do with in this case are his efforts, well, not only having actually made the tape, so having made the child pornography, persuading a minor to engage in sexual activities on tape, but his efforts to cover that up, which ultimately led to him having been acquitted. This story, dates back to when Jane was only, around 12 or 13 years old. And she talks about how she first came to meet R. Kelly. So she remembers that she was 12 or 13 years old. She was a gospel singer in the church. So she was, singing at a gospel concert, and that's when R. Kelly showed up at the church. And so she testified saying, hey, she was starstruck by this situation. And you can only imagine, like I kind of, went back to when I was a kid, because I grew up in the church and I remember being in the youth choir, right? And so if I imagine my 12, 13-year-old self in the youth choir, and then a dude the stature of R. Kelly would come in and just watch our little program, right? How crazy would that be, in a positive way, to have R. Kelly show up at, your just random little, your little church event. But, so she recalls both her and, everybody in the crowd being starstruck. This was R. Kelly. Later on, he ended up showing up to another one of her shows with her aunt. So her aunt, named Stephanie, apparently was actually a musician working with R. Kelly at the time. And so Jane testified that she later found out her aunt Stephanie and R. Kelly, had some sort of romantic involvement. So this wasn't something that she knew at the time, but this was something that she learned later on. She said that, when R. Kelly was at this gospel show, he ended up giving her some sort of critique of the performance. And she said, she felt special. And this makes sense. I mean, again, a lot of your rappers, R&B singers, producers, in the urban space came up in the church. That's where they got their first taste of musical performance. And so I'm sure this little girl, at the time, had hopes and dreams of potentially being an R&B singer. And so when you have one of the biggest stars in the world coming up and giving you pointers on your performance, that just had to be huge. This ended up leading towards her being able to go to R. Kelly's studio. So her aunt Stephanie brought her along with her to R. Kelly's studio. All right. And so this is when things started to go in another direction, because her aunt basically encouraged her. And this is, per Jane's testimony, her aunt said, hey, she began to encourage me to sit on his lap. All right. So remember, she's 13, 14 years old. And her own aunt is encouraging her to sit on his lap, to rub his head, and then to ask him to be her godfather. And she said that, that's when everything really changed at this point. For me, just looking at this, it's just absolutely disgusting. I'm sorry. I just had no words. I mean, this is a 14-year-old girl. She's starstruck naturally. She's 14. She doesn't know anything. She has no, world knowledge at this point. And she has this aunt, and I'm not certain if this was, on her father's side, on her mother's side. It doesn't matter. It's her aunt. And the aunt, as, an authority figure in her life, is supposed to be, protecting this little girl as if it were her own child. I mean, this is her sibling's daughter. And she's encouraging this little girl to just sit on this guy's lap and rub his head. I just, it's just hard to take in. Jane then said that basically within weeks, their relationship became sexual. And she said it started with phone conversations, and R. Kelly would call her up and ask her questions like, what color panties are you wearing? And again, this dynamic, this little girl and this grown man who's, 29, 30 years old at this point, is, having these sexually charged conversations with her. He started commenting on how her breasts were growing, right? This is a little girl, and these conversations ultimately progressed to actually having, phone sex, and then actually turning physical when she turned 14. So they would be hanging out, and, they would watch TV, and he'd start rubbing on her and touching on her, and he was giving her alcohol. So again, she's 14 years old. R. Kelly is giving her alcohol drinks to loosen her up. And again, this starts to get graphic. So, I'm sure you're well aware of what the allegations are, but, excuse if this is too much. But she said that eventually they started moving to oral sex and other type of sexual acts when she was 14 years old, and they progressed to actual vaginal sex when she was 15. She said they would meet up at his studio or, at his house. There's a George Street house apparently that he lived at, and that's where she said these things would go down. And she said that, he would play porn video for her. So, before they would get into acts, that he would play these videos, and actually the videos had people that she knew in these videos. She said that, eventually they had group sex. So he would actually tell her to, bring your friends, have your friends come through. She had threesomes and group sex with her friends. And so she actually lost her virginity to R. Kelly when she was only 15 years old. She had sex with R. Kelly an uncountable number of times. So she said it was hundreds of times that she had sex with R. Kelly. And as we're looking at this, one time should be enough, but we're getting to hundreds. And so she will already have been, by now, it's Friday afternoon, she will already have been subjected to cross-examination. And we'll get, in fairness, we'll get to what that testimony was and what was revealed on cross-examination. But if you watched my video from the other day, I was saying how it can be a challenge. It is very difficult to refute something that someone says happened. So when we have Jane saying, hey, we had sex hundreds of times, I was a minor, I was 15 years old, this guy was, in his early 30s. The main way to, refute that testimony would be R. Kelly himself taking the stand and saying these things did not happen. Again, I was saying that R. Kelly is not taking the stand, so there's not going to be a direct refuting that these things did not happen. Rather, they're going to call into question her credibility and bring up the different lies and the denials in the past, but there won't be a direct addressing of what she's saying, that she did have sex with this man hundreds of times when she was a minor and he was an adult. She mentioned viewing him as an authoritative figure. And so she said, hey, she started having, sex with him or performing these sex acts with him out of intimidation. And again, there is a huge power dynamic. There's a huge power dynamic as between, a 14-year-old girl or 15-year-old girl and a 30-year-old, right? Just in and of itself, let alone being rich, powerful, famous, a worldwide known star as R. Kelly was at this time. She felt uncomfortable with this. That is to be expected, but it started to become normal for her. It just turned into her having feelings for R. Kelly, and it became normal because, they had sex so often that this actually became the new normal for her. And she said she developed feelings for him. He had told her that he loved her. He told her he would take care of her. He said he would protect her. So she felt good. She felt good. She had this, superstar showing her attention, showing her what she perceived to be real love, and enjoyed it. They asked her on direct examination, and oftentimes you want to hit these type of issues directly. Rather than the opposing counsel to bring them out on cross-examination, you want to hit these issues head on. And so the prosecutor asked her, well, why did you do this? And so she said, hey, she thought she was in love with R. Kelly at the time. Early on, when they started having phone sex, when she was around 13 or 14 years old, that R. Kelly told her to keep the relationship secret. So don't tell anybody about this situation. She said that R. Kelly told her that, they could get in trouble, and it was very important that she remained loyal to him. She wanted to tell her friends. She was really excited about this situation. She didn't tell her friends because she was afraid, but she did eventually, share this with her aunt. And, the same aunt, Stephanie, that introduced them, she ultimately confided in her that this stuff was going on. She then testified that R. Kelly started recording their sexual activity when she was 14 years old. She said she felt uncomfortable about being recorded, and, naturally so, right? But again, she felt like R. Kelly was an authoritative figure, and she didn't want to feel awkward. That was her claimed reasoning for not basically objecting to being recorded. So she gave testimony and background regarding the recordings that were played for the jury. So portions of these tapes were actually played for the jury. She said one of the scenes were at his house, so them having sex in his bedroom and the living room. And she did actually have to watch these videos in preparation for the trial. She said in one of the videos, they were having oral and simulated sex in the bedroom. He's talking about having her describe her quote unquote 14-year-old body. In another one of the videos, he had given her champagne. He performed oral sex on her and then urinated on her. That became infamous, that he was peeing on girls in these tapes. So she talked about him actually peeing on her vagina. And then there was a third video, and this was the actual video that was the subject of that 2008 child pornography trial. And she said that she performed oral sex on him in the jacuzzi, and then he again urinated on her. Apparently in the video, R. Kelly hands her money. This evoked tears. She basically said that the reason why he was handing her money was so that if anyone saw the tape, he wanted it to seem as though he was having sex with a prostitute and basically paying for sex. Eventually, there were claims by the Illinois Department of Child and Family Services. They started investigating claims about this sexual relationship. She was questioned about whether, they had any sort of sexual or inappropriate relationship, and she denied it. And she denied it because she was afraid that something would happen to R. Kelly. She wanted to protect him. He had told her that if you don't help me, that something bad might happen to me. She denied everything, and ultimately R. Kelly rewarded her by saying, hey, she did a good job and she handled everything correctly. Eventually, one of these tapes ended up leaking in 2002. Jane and her parents ended up having a conversation with R. Kelly. His former business manager, who's also on trial, Daryl McDavid, arranged a conversation. So they end up going to a hotel. It's R. Kelly, it's Daryl McDavid, Jane and her parents. They meet at this hotel, and she, Jane testified, hey, she was scared about the situation because now her parents were finally going to find out about this sexual relationship because they hadn't known about it to this point. R. Kelly had told her that, hey, it's true. This is true that the tape, with them on it had been leaked and the authorities were about to get involved. So what he wanted to do is basically have her and have the parents quote unquote on his team, right? So are you going to help me to make sure that this doesn't go any further than it needs to go? She then testifies about her father storming out of the meeting, that he was crying, and R. Kelly is basically pleading him to stay in the room. He's crying, he's begging the father for forgiveness. And you can imagine in this situation, provided what she's saying is true, this father being extremely angry, being extremely sad, probably wanting to kill this guy for having sex with his young daughter. So these parents are finding out about this situation in this way in a hotel room, and also being asked to be on board, to be on R. Kelly's team, to not cooperate with authorities. Jane testified that she felt embarrassed for lying to her parents, and at this point they finally understood that these rumors were true. She was scared about what might happen to R. Kelly again. This was something that she felt like she was in love with him and that he loved her, and she was basically begging her parents not to turn him in. After that meeting, R. Kelly arranged for them to leave the country, so they ended up going to the Bahamas and Cancun. They went on a month-long vacation, basically to keep them out of the area so that they could not be subjected to any questioning by the authorities. One of the things, that would naturally come up and that they ended up addressing is, where were the parents in all this? When you look at anything that has to do with R. Kelly, people are saying, hey, what happened with the parents? Lock the parents up. What were they doing? Why aren't they being held responsible for this? And so at least as it pertains to Jane, she was saying, hey, R. Kelly was her godfather. There was this sort of blind, naive trust, if you will, that R. Kelly was just working on music with their daughter. And they felt comfortable, right? They felt comfortable with her in the studio because the aunt was present, right? So, naturally, and again, I'm not sure if this was the father's sister or the mother's sister, but either way, they felt like she's with her Aunt Stephanie. Nothing's going to happen. It's okay. On top of that, R. Kelly was apparently married at the time. And so, a lot of times her parents thought that she was at R. Kelly's home with R. Kelly, his wife, and then her and the aunt. But no, a lot of times she was at the studio alone with R. Kelly. When you look at this testimony, ultimately, and look at what the prosecution has to prove in terms of finding that, he persuaded a minor to engage in sexual activity, that he persuaded a minor to engage in sexual activity for the purpose of creating child pornography, and the obstruction, this testimony, if ultimately believed, is going to basically fulfill the elements that the prosecutor needs to prove in order to find him guilty. And so again, today is Friday. This testimony happened yesterday. And so she would have been subject to cross-examination today. And we'll see, where the defense goes with it. I think, really it's just going to be an attack on her credibility. I don't think that they're really going to be able to get into that, hey, these things really did not happen, or they'll try and she'll just double down on what it is that she's saying. I mean, if she is adamant that, hey, I had sexual relations with R. Kelly, starting out again with phone sex, progressing to, rubbing and touching, and then actual intercourse at 15, the only way, again, that's going to be able to be refuted would be by R. Kelly himself saying that these things didn't happen. That's not going to happen. Things just get tougher for R. Kelly. That's it for today. If you got something out of this breakdown, please show me some love. Hit the like button. Make sure you subscribe to the channel and turn on those notifications so you never miss a new video when it drops. As always, I want to thank you so much for watching. Until next time, peace.